Carnal spirit of action and the supreme stance of devotion, karma, sannyasa and parabhakti. The subject of today's discourse is the carnal spirit of action and the supreme stance of devotion, karma, sannyasa and parabhakti. What is action or karma, and what is its cardinal spirit? The relative change of position of objects is termed karma. This karma can never be performed beyond the periphery of time, space, and person. The relative change of place of objects presupposes the very existence of time, space, and person. This additional faculty is non-existent in the case of the supreme entity, because that entity is beyond the scope of relativity. Now, what do you understand by the expression karma sannyasa? The word sannyasa had been derived from sam or sat plus nyasa. The word sat refers to the unchangeable entity. The word sannyasa implies one's total identification with that unchangeable entity. Now let us return to the interpretation of karma sannyasa, carnal spirit of action. According to some interpretations, it means total inactivity. Some are of the view that it signifies perfect completion of work, and others opine that unification with the supreme consciousness through karma is karma sannyasa. Now let us judge who is the real agent of karma to attain its finality. As has been mentioned earlier, the periphery of knowledge is bound by the factor of time, space, and person. Karma sannyasa is possible only when each factor of time, space, and person comes within the scope of tactual relationship with the subjective bearing, that is, the time factor with the eternal entity, space with the all-pervading entity, and the personal factor with the supreme shelter. That is why karma sannyasa cannot be termed merely as medium of some kind of achievement. Rather, it is a state of supreme culmination. Now, who is the doer of karma? We know that the range of action is limited within the arena of time, space, and person. So there are two functional agents or doers of action, the macrocosm on the one hand and the macrocosm on the other. Apart from these two, no third entity can be of any relevance in the matter of attaining the proper finality of action. The awakening of psychic desire at any moment compels the physical body to be active, but the body is incapable of any function in the absence of an impetus from the mind. There are two reasons for this. First, there is always the attraction of the cosmic mind. Therefore, if there is any command from the Supreme, the individual entity is bound to move. Secondly, the unit mind can direct the movement of any other entity in spite of its unwillingness. Hence, an action is executed either by a unit mind or by the cosmic mind. The wind blows. Wind is a blind force, devoid of its own psyche. This wind is a material entity, but it moves due to the impetus from the cosmic mind. It is similar to that of a top spun by young boys. Boys can't always spin the tops. They spin only when they are thrown in a particular way, in a perfect fashion, otherwise not. A top has no power to spin unless it is made to do so by a second entity. Likewise, the sun is moving around its nucleus with its large family of celestial bodies under divine inspiration. Hence, all physical activities originate from the mind, which is the prime mover of all actions. No action can take place without the impulse of mind. Both the unit mind and the cosmic mind function within the bounds of time, space, and person. But the difference between the two is that the unit mind may not necessarily consciously comprehend the function of cosmic mind, although the unit mind comprehends on its unconscious level. And even what remains unknown to the unit mind is certainly known to the Supreme, because the cosmic mind maintains the cognizant bearing with its independent will. The function of the cosmic mind may or may not be prompted by any cause. Regarding the macrocosmic function, it may be said that it may or may not take place within the relative factors of time, space, and person. As long as the casual stance of the macrocosmic function of Paramapurusha remains within the scope of time, space, and person, the unit may be graced with that very realization. But if the supreme cause is beyond the periphery of time, space, and person, it remains indiscernible for the unit mind. In that case, the unit mind assumes everything to be a divine play. As the mind is the nominal cause of action, so the latter is dependent upon the mind for its finality. It is said in Sanskrita, Mana eva manusyanam karanam bandha mokshayo. Now let us analyze how the mind functions. In the physical sphere, energy is essential for action. What is energy? Energy is the actional state within a material structure. This energy by itself is a blind force, and for its activation, intellect must exist. A driver is required to direct this blind force. The support of the intellect is a prime necessity for the operation of energy in the material world. If a useful thing is kept easily accessible to the common people in a country or society, in most cases it is misused or spoiled. Those who are considerate and have the power of judgment should be entrusted with the responsibility of controlling the physical power of common people with their intellectual power. Otherwise everything will be spoiled. It is like a bullock, which without a driver is unable to decide whether to pull its cart towards the right or the left. Only a discriminating driver can control everything efficiently. As people, guided by their intellect, continue to gather practical experiences of the ups and downs of this world, they gradually start to realize that their psychic capacities are too inadequate to accomplish any great task. Then, faced with the stark realities of life, they realize that they have no alternative but to merge with the Supreme Consciousness. At that stage, whatever they do will have a cosmic support and will be genuine. That is why enlightened persons always prefer to remain unified with the Supreme Entity. This is considered the highest attainment of knowledge. Undeveloped human beings consider themselves to be very intelligent, and thus at every step they invite innumerable obstacles in the material world. Later on, after climbing some rungs up the ladder of evolution, they realize from the core of their hearts the hollowness of their psychic capabilities. It is the natural rule of the universe that those who possess immense knowledge are quite conscious of their intellectual limitations, whereas people with superficial knowledge think just the opposite. The genuine way of learning for seekers of knowledge is to consider always that they know nothing. One can execute some ordinary types of work with one's own little intellect, but if one aspires to undertake any noble ventures, then one has to unite one's own intellect with the cosmic intellect, and work with the help of the supreme knowledge of Paramapurusha. This is the spirit of karma sannyasa. Now, what is the method to merge the unit mind in the cosmic mind? As the basic trend of the evolutionary process is from the crude towards the subtle, therefore in order to make one's own intellect subtle, one is to take the ideation of the subtlest entity, not to remain engrossed in crude objects. With the constant ideation of the Supreme, the mind will gradually attain more and more subtlety, and will ultimately be converted into the subtlest entity. After this, the sense of separation in the microcosm ceases to exist, and it becomes one with the cosmic mind. When the unit intellect arrives at this highest point, there is no doubt that it has become one with the Supreme Intellect. This state of pinnacle intellect is called karma sannyasa, so wise people should be ever vigilant regarding karma sannyasa. What is the relationship between karma sannyasa and parabhakti? When the Supreme Consciousness remains in his unassailed state, in his original stance he is called Parabrahma. But when that Parabrahma is transmuted into different ideas or objects, then that Supreme Consciousness is termed a Parabrahma. Attachment toward a Parabrahma is called Aparabhakti, and intense love for Parabrahma is called Parabhakti. What is knowledge? Knowledge is the subjectivization of external objectivities. When external objectivities are not subjectivized, there occurs either internal or external reflection or reflection of the mental plate. This is nothing but the result of external or internal reactions. This is true knowledge. This is not true knowledge or direct knowledge. In fact, it is not knowledge at all, but a shadow of knowledge. Those only reach up to the range of reflection or refresh and develop ego. But those who are truly learned are devoid of any ego, because they are all well aware. They are well aware of the subjective cause of the external objectivities. Atmagyanam vidur gyanam, jnana jnani janitu tani janava basani saras janaeva bodhanat. Self-realization is the only knowledge. All other types of knowledge are simply the umbra and penumbra of knowledge, because they do not contribute to any real understanding of objects. This self-realization does not consist of any subjectivization, because at this stage the external objects, the mind and soul, all become one. Then knower, knowledge, and the object of knowledge are all unified in the attainment of supreme oneness. If a teacher of Bhopal city is asked, how many ants are there in the city, or how many bricks are there in the buildings, he or she will not be able to answer, because the external objectivities have not been subjectivized. When it is possible to do so, there is no necessity of reading books. Even without reading, people can form an exact idea about objects reflected in the Atman. By knowing the objects reflected in the Atman, they can get all the answers to the questions what, when, how, etc. This is true knowledge. Everything else is the mere shadow of knowledge. The changes in psychic objects bring about a liberation from the bondage of those factors, which constitute the mind. Knowledge originates in the mind, but it culminates in supreme spirituality. Therefore, the base of knowledge, like the base of action, is in the self. Its origin is in the mind, but its culminating point is in the self. Now let us see what is Parabhakti. When the Supreme Entity is not under the bondage of Prakriti, he is called Parabrahma. But when he comes under the bondage of Prakriti, he becomes finite and gradually is bound more and more by the gunas. Even great scholars know only a little. They cannot know everything, because they are not omniscient. The culmination of their learning is within the bondage of Prakriti, but the culminating point of their spiritual path is freedom from the bondage of Prakriti. To understand the meaning of Parabhakti, it is essential to know its supreme aim, because Parabhakti is closely related to karma sannyasa. Every action has its end, its objective. The movement towards such an objective has two trends, which are known as Atmanepadi and Parasmayepadi. If a person is greatly attracted towards a limited object, his or her mind will rush towards that object, and when at last the mind attains it, it gradually becomes one with that object. At that time, action and knowledge vanish, for they take the form of that object. You may have noticed, for example, that when some learned